Hello there, everybody, and welcome back to Circling Seattle Sports on Converge Media. Of course, as always, I am your host, Charles Hamaker, here with you the week the second week of February, I believe it is, after a wonderful Super Bowl Sunday where the Kansas City Chiefs beat the San Francisco 49ers. I only say that, of course, because you don't want in-division teams winning the Super Bowl. That was great to see. Wonderful. Otherwise, in terms of the Seahawks, and sticking with that theme, some more exciting news in that regard, some good, some bad. You know, with the Super Bowl happening, there's the different awards being given out the day before, and so on and so forth with that. We'll get to that as that's the beginning of our show. The Mariners are they're not a ton of big news per se, but we're approaching spring training. It's quickly approaching. Pitchers and catchers report in just a few days, which will be excellent. The Storm officially nailed down a deal just hours after we recorded the last show that you saw, and we'll go over that and a few other things regarding our Storm. The Sounders are back from their preseason trip to Spain. The Reign are back from their preseason trip to Costa Rica, and the Kraken kind of seem like they're still on vacation, losing their first game out of the All-Star break. So we'll start, as I mentioned, as we always do, with our Seahawks, and with the Seahawks, with Mike McDonald officially hired as your head coach, you've got to fill out the rest of that staff. A bunch of former staffers are heading to other jobs. Larry Izzo's gone. Eric Dickerson's gone. So you're starting to try and fill those holes. Obviously, Clint Hurt over to Philadelphia as the former defensive coordinator. Shane Waldron signed a deal early after it was announced that Pete Carroll wasn't going to be the Seahawks head coach to join the Bears to fill the same offensive coordinator role there. And during Super Bowl week, wide receiver Jackson Smith-Njigba was asked twice about Waldron and kind of hesitated in giving his answers, which kind of tells you all you need to know about how the now going to be second-year receiver felt about his former offensive coordinator. The point being, you're now starting to see the Seahawks start to fill some of these roles, fill out that coaching staff as Mike McDonald enters his first year as Seattle's head coach. So we'll go into that here. On the 5th, the team hired Packers assistant Kirk Olavidati to coach linebackers. His connection with Mike McDonald actually goes back to Georgia. So filling that linebackers coach role after, again, you're seeing a bunch of these assistants head off to different jobs with the new regime coming in. So that was on the 5th. We take a quick pit stop. I mentioned the awards and such. On the 7th, it was announced that 2 former Seahawks had made the NFL Hall of Fame. Defensive end Dwight Freeney, he only played 3 games as a member of the Seahawks, as well as punt returner, kick returner / wide receiver Devin Hester also was named to the Hall of Fame, the greatest returner in NFL history. So 2 guys who spent very brief stints with the Seahawks. There's the joke, these guys are Seahawks legends. You could say so. I mean, Dwight Freeney was effective in his 3-game stint with Seattle. Devin Hester had some amazing moments for the Seahawks as well during his time here, including some big returns in the team's playoff run that saw them beat the Lions at home here and then lose to the Falcons on the road in the next game in the divisional round. So 2 guys who did contribute to Seahawks. Obviously, will not be represented as Seahawks in the Hall of Fame for those 2 players, but still notable nonetheless. Also notable that Marshawn Lynch and Earl Thomas are eligible for the Hall of Fame starting next year. I would love to see both of those guys in there. Obviously, 2 guys whose Seahawks tenures and current relationship with the team didn't necessarily end super well. I would love to see Marshawn make it. I don't think, unfortunately, as a guy that, loved his career and idolized him, but also as someone who's, trying to factor in the voters, I don't think he'll be a first ballot, but I do think eventually he will make it into the Hall of Fame. You look at February 8th, continuing with this sort of rewards season, cornerback Devon Witherspoon finished 4th in Defensive Rookie of the Year voting, which is somewhat disrespectful. Just considering the year that Spoon had, yes, he missed some games this season, with injury, didn't start the year out with the team. finishing fourth is pretty ridiculous. I mean, he should have won it even with missing those games. Jalen Carter had a solid year for the Eagles, a guy that a lot of folks thought the Seahawks are drafted. But, just considering the impact that Witherspoon made for the Seahawks team and what it looks like he can do as a whole, whether it is coming down into the run game, his tackling ability, and obviously his coverage skills, I don't think there was a better impactful rookie on the defensive side of the ball. And so for him to finish fourth, largely because of those missed games, is pretty disrespectful. So that was frustrating. But Seahawks linebacker Bobby Wagner did win the 2023 Art Rooney Sportsmanship Award. Wagner had also been up for the Walter Payton Man of the Year award. So, obviously Bobby, had a ton of tackles this year, continued to be effective in that regard, continuing to be a force in the community as well. And that shows with his sportsmanship award, winning that. So at least one Seahawk took some hardware home in that regard. And again, great to see that considering the sort of support that Bobby gives out, to the area and in the community as well. So good to acknowledge that and see that happen and for Bobby to win that award as well. The next day, the team hired Aiden Durd as their defensive coordinator. So we get back into the coaching news in that sort of regard. This one was interesting with the defensive coordinator because with Mike McDonald's introductory press conference, he had said that he was still going to be calling the plays on the defensive side of the ball. And so this defensive coordinator role isn't going to be the same as it would for some other teams. So Durd comes in. He was born in England. He played in NFL Europe and the NFL before embarking on his coaching career. He was an integral part of the International Player Pathway program, having been born in Middlesex, England. Had that football career in the United Kingdom with the London Olympians. Also played for the Scottish Claymores as a linebacker. So his full career was the London Olympians, the Scottish Claymores, the Carolina Panthers practice squad in 2005, the Hamburg Sea Devils, and the Kansas City Chiefs practice squad in 2008. So he took some time after his career ended and got into coaching in 2018. In 2018, he joined the Atlanta Falcons as their defensive quality control coach. Spent a few years there until 2020. In 2021, he joined the Cowboys as their defensive line coach and has been there ever since. Spent a lot of time with Dan Quinn, had spent time with Quinn during his tenure in Atlanta. So there's a lot of influence there from Durd with Dan Quinn. Dan Quinn obviously spent some time before he left for Atlanta in Seattle and had interviewed twice for the Seahawks job here as the head coach. So the 44-year-old Durd takes a big role in this staff. But again, as I mentioned, Mike McDonald still calling plays defensively. It will be interesting to see the sort of impact that Durd has and the more that we learn about his role. The same day later, we were talking about this before we went on for the show here. This one was fun. We had talked about it last week, and even since Mike McDonald has been hired, who the offensive coordinator was going to be and how that was going to be figured out. Ryan Grubb initially had been in the running, but at a booster meeting for Alabama, he had told those in attendance that he was going to be the offensive coordinator for Alabama, but he hadn't signed a contract yet. Chip Kelly had reported for the Seahawks job here. He had left UCLA. He's now in Ohio State, so that took him out of the running. He wanted to get out of UCLA, and so on and so forth. And he thought, okay, the Seahawks have to look somewhere else. In the afternoon of February 9th, a few different folks on the platform known as Twitter, I'm not calling it X, posted photos of a meeting at Dino's Pub in Renton with Ryan Grubb, Mike McDonald, and general manager John Schneider at the table. And later on, eventually, Adam Schefter and a few other sources, there were some sources that confirmed it earlier in the day, dubbed up Huskies on Twitter, had put something out about it, confirmed that Grubb was in fact becoming the offensive coordinator of the Seattle Seahawks. So, Grubb obviously became a fan favorite during his coaching career with the Huskies after following Kalen DeBoer there in 2021. Completely overhauling the offense, some big explosive plays. There was thought that maybe he would become the next head coach of the Huskies, but he announced on the 14th that he wasn't, and then would go to join Grubb at DeBoer at Alabama. There was a lot of thought maybe, he'd come back at some other point. A lot of Husky fans were happy with Grubb because he actually put out a statement about the university as opposed to DeBoer. Instead, he comes back to Seattle in the form of the Seahawks offensive coordinator. So some exciting news there, just considering, he'd already become a lot of a fan favorite for Seattle with his time with the University of Washington. And he comes back to Seattle and kind of leaves Kalen DeBoer in the dust, leaves him with an offensive coordinator role to fill at Alabama. Also, 2 days later, it was announced that the team had finalized the hire of Scott Huff as their offensive line coach. Huff joined Grubb after leaving Alabama because he had been at UW with Grubb and DeBoer, had gone with DeBoer to Alabama, and now follows Grubb to Seattle to join the Seattle Seahawks. So we look at that. It's kind of a funny way that this all played out. Again, it was going to be interesting no matter what to see how things played out with the different coordinator roles, who they were going to fill out. The fact that Chip Kelly was even in the running, someone that, a lot of folks, a lot of American football fans here in the area didn't necessarily like for a long period of time because of the fact that he was the Oregon football head coach and then the San Francisco 49ers head coach as well. So a lot of interesting twists and turns that this coaching staff is filling out. We know that Jay Harbaugh, son of John Harbaugh, I believe, is the special teams coordinator. So it's starting to fill out. There's still some hires to make for this team, but, obviously offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, offensive line coach, linebackers coach, all filled out that we've mentioned from this past week. So again, just seeing the group that Mike Macdonald is creating in his rookie year as the Seahawks head coach, it will be something to follow, as he turns this Seattle Seahawks team into his own. Obviously there are some pieces that will remain from Pete Carroll's tenure, but those who don't remain is going to be what I'm looking for, whether it's certain players. Bobby Wagner's talked about wanting to be back here. Jordan Brooks is out of a contract, so that sort of aspect. It's kind of fun to see the different changes. Sad, of course, because you get used to so much of these guys. Larry Izzo was a special teams coordinator here for a long time. He's not here anymore. So there's change, but I feel like it's necessary change. And again, it'll be fun to see, Ryan Grubb call plays at the NFL level. He's never done that before. So again, very unique to see how John Schneider, how Mike Macdonald are filling out the staff and how they're taking this organization into a somewhat new direction. So that's what we've got for now. The offseason, quote unquote, can officially begin with the Super Bowl taking place. The Chiefs are your champions. The draft order is finalized, and we go from there. So, now we can start to wonder things about free agents, about the draft itself, and who the Seahawks might take. The mock drafts have already been starting since Mike Macdonald got hired. So, and even before then, back to when the Seahawks were eliminated from playoff contention. So, stuff to keep track of. Surely it'll be an interesting offseason. It already has been, whether it's seeing Ryan Grubb at Dino's Pub, Mike Macdonald being hired, Pete Carroll gone, and in an advisor role, quote unquote, and even talking about that staff, Leslie Frazier as the assistant head coach, his defensive influence, his mentorship of Mike Macdonald. There's already some stuff, with the coaching staff at least, to be excited about with the Seattle Seahawks team. So we go from that, Seahawks, a lot of coaching staff stuff, some disappointing award news in terms of Devon Witherspoon, but also Bobby Wagner earning the Art Rooney Sportsmanship Award. That's positive. So mostly positive week for the Seahawks there. We switch over here to the Mariners, and I don't know. This is also interesting. It was unique, and it also has a Seahawks tie that we'll get to here in a second. So we jump into it here. The team claimed right-handed pitcher Colin Snyder off of waivers from the Arizona Diamondbacks. At the time, that move did fill the 40-man roster. It's another arm. We've seen a bunch of different arms added throughout the course of the offseason as the team will look to replenish that bullpen, find potentially the next diamond in the rough, as they have so often with relievers and with pitchers. Where there's guys, obviously, you look at Paul Sewald this last year, You look at Gabe Spire, Justin Topa, who was traded. There's more than a few names to look at with the Mariners and their pitching factory, so to say. Colin Snyder is interesting. I mean, he's got some stuff in terms of his pitching arsenal, and that's obviously what this Mariners pitching staff looks at so often. He's 28. He made 20 appearances and one start with the Royals last year, including one save and a 4.87 ERA, 13 walks, 11 strikeouts. He was claimed off waivers by Arizona on December 18th. But placed back on waivers shortly after as well. So in 2 major league seasons with the Royals, the 6'8" righty is 4-2 with one save and a 5.93 ERA. So nothing that necessarily jumps off the page at you. He hasn't been in the big league super long. As I mentioned, just 2 seasons in the big leagues there, both of them with the Royals, getting into their system back in 2017. But obviously, there's something that the Mariners staff saw that they liked, and they wanted to kick the tires on. It'll be interesting to see, again, if he is going to be the eventual next one that steps up for this Mariners organization that says, hey, you've got great stuff. We're going to work on that, and we're going to make you a weapon out of the bullpen. So moving forward with that, the team roster move that I mentioned that has a Seahawks tie on the 7th, the Mariners claimed outfielder Kanan Smith-Njigba off of waivers from the Pittsburgh Pirates. Now, that name will sound familiar because Kanan is the older brother of Jackson Smith-Njigba of our Seattle Seahawks that I briefly just talked about. So this was a fun move. I mean, when the Pirates put him on waivers, designated him for assignment, there was the thought of Seattle picking him up, and now he does so. I thought maybe it would be just a minor league deal with an invitation to spring training. It is not. So the Mariners claimed the 24-year-old Kanan Smith-Njigba off of waivers, and as a result, they put Darren McCacken, right-handed pitcher, they designated him for assignment. So we'll talk about McCacken here in a second, but Kanan Smith-Njigba appeared in 15 games at the big league level with the Pirates in 2023, going 4 for 32 with a double, triple, and 5 RBIs in a pair of different stints with the big league club. In 105 games with AAA Indianapolis last season, the left-hander hit 280 with 57 runs, 28 doubles, 1 triple, 15 homers, 74 RBIs, 21 stolen bases, and 53 walks. As I mentioned, again, the older brother of Jackson Smith-Njigba with our Seahawks. So cool to see the brothers in the same city. He will likely start the year at least with the Rainiers in Tacoma, so in the same vicinity. But interesting to see that with the trade last week for Gregory Santos and losing Zach Deloach, you essentially replace him with Kanan Smith-Njigba, which I'm not necessarily upset with. Darren McCacken, I have a buddy who was a very big Darren McCacken fan, so he's not necessarily happy about that. The 27-year-old, he made 3 relief appearances with the big league club in Seattle in 2023. Finishing with a 5.4 ERA. He made 25 starts with the Rainiers last year, going 7-8 with a 5.83 ERA, 44 walks, and 130 strikeouts. He was originally drafted by the Mariners in the 12th round of the 2017 first-year draft out of Long Beach State, and has kind of been a mainstay for the Rainiers ever since that point. Kind of always a guy that the Mariners had at the ready in AAA in case he needed to be called up. So that one's kind of fun. More roster news type stuff for the Mariners after that. The same day, the 7th, the team announced spring training non-roster invitations. Lead-handed pitcher, you kind of see the list here on your screen. We'll go through a few notable names. Jonathan Diaz, Kirby Snead were guys that the Mariners added this offseason. And just like with Colin Snyder, will they be the next bullpen pieces for the Mariners? We'll have to see that. Right-handers, Darren McCacken, though designated for assignment, by the Mariners there the same day, was given an invitation to spring training, but later on he would be traded to the Miami Marlins for cash consideration. So that won't be happening. McCacken does go to Miami. Manny, I'm sorry to tell you that. But looking at the rest of these pitchers here with invitations to spring training that are not a part of the roster, Jimmy Joyce, Travis Kuhn, are all got Marcelo Perez. There's more than a few guys who are prospects here, so it'll be interesting to see what they display. Maybe they surprise us. Maybe they move up throughout the system quicker than expected. But mainly what I was looking at with these non-roster invitations to spring training was the position players. You can see Harry Ford in the group of catchers there. Ryan Bliss, who was acquired via trade last year at the deadline. He's done well in Tacoma and thought about as maybe a future potential second baseman there here in Seattle. But obviously with the addition of Jorge Polanco, maybe not quite yet. A few different guys, Caden Polkovich, Brock Rodden, Cole Tucker's there. We talked about him earlier this offseason. Hogan Windish is another minor league guy. Cole Young, one of the top prospects for the Mariners that you can see on your screen here. On the outfield, Spencer Packard, Alberto Rodriguez. Again, it's always fun with the non-roster invitations to see the minor league guys get those calls up as well. So you kind of see here with that group, you're kind of getting ready for spring training. You know, pitchers and catchers report in 3 days for the Mariners, and 8 days for the whole squad to report. So we're getting closer and closer to spring training, closer and closer to opening day, and finding out what that roster will look like by the time that we reach March 28th against the Boston Red Sox at T-Mobile Park. So not a lot of surprises per se. I mean, I didn't necessarily expect to see Darren McCacken gone, but you go out, you essentially find a replacement for Zach DeLoach and Kanan Smith and Jigba. Not necessarily mad at it. Again, my friend will not be happy about it because he's a super fan for Darren McCacken. But I mean, it'll be fun to see guys like Cole Young, like Harry Ford in camp and see what they can do. If you think back earlier, a few different guys who have made their name for the Mariners and kind of showed, whether it was, the big league club, the front office, that they were ready for that next step. In recent years, obviously Julio Rodriguez, Jared Kelenic. So again, very fun to have these younger minor leaguers be able to showcase their talent, and maybe surprise a few folks throughout the organization when it comes to spring training. I don't necessarily think that there will be a lot of surprise here. It kind of seems like the Mariners' big league roster is somewhat set outside of maybe different bench positions and whoever is going to be the mainstay at third base. Maybe there won't be a mainstay consistently. But again, always fun to look at that. Also fun to turn it over here. We have new jersey numbers for a few players. So Jorge Polanco will wear the number 7. Gregory Santos will wear the number 48. Samad Taylor will wear the number 12. Zebi Zavala will wear the number 33. Colin Snyder, who we just talked about, will wear the number 52. All of those guys, new guys, but Brian Wu, after wearing the 33 last year, will wear the number 22. So Wu, 22. Always interesting to see different player numbers there. Luis Torrens, wearing the 22 somewhat consistently the last few years for the Mariners when he's been here. Jorge Polanco, we're taking the number 7. Obviously, with Marco Gonzalez gone, the number 7 is back on the market. Gregory Santos taking the number 48 from Justin Topa, who was traded in exchange for Jorge Polanco. So kind of fun to see the different roster numbers. No real surprises here, or no super big names, but kind of fun to see Ryan Wu change his number. It was interesting when guys like him and Bryce Miller were called up if they would eventually change their numbers. Now Wu does ahead of 2024. So that's what we've got for the Mariners. As I mentioned, pitchers and catchers report in 3 days. A lot of fun there, and the full squad in 8 days. But then we go, how many days until... I think we're 45 days until opening day. 45 days until opening day. So looking forward to that. Looking forward to everything that spring training brings, and maybe some more news for that here in a little bit. But we now switch over to our storm. And as I mentioned, I thought it was going to happen either during the show or just after. And it does. As you can see on your screen here, the team officially signed Nneka Ogwumike to a 1-year deal on February 5th, just shortly after we got wrapped up recording for the show. So there had been talks about it. We had seen when she had visited Climate Pledge Arena. If you go back a few weeks, we've got that visit documented. It's a 1-year deal, which is different than Skylar Diggins-Smith, who signed a 2-year deal. But, there was Nneka, outside of it, SDS was the most prized free agent on the market. She had been listing her final few destinations as Chicago, New York, and Seattle. And if you just look at that group of three, Chicago doesn't make any sense if you want to compete in the near future. New York doesn't make a ton of sense because either you're fighting for a ton of minutes there, you're with that loaded New York Liberty roster, or you're off the bench, and there's no way you can bring Neck off the bench, right? So she comes to Seattle. She helps form a core four with Jewell Loyd, Skylar Diggins-Smith, herself, and then Ezi Magbagor. So you've got a big group there. Asia Wilson on Twitter was saying, not enough of y'all are talking about Seattle being a super team. So that was fun. But we get that confirmation finally. We'll talk about it here. It's a ton of fun to have it. I mean, we go 2 seasons ago to the Storm trying to push for one last title for Sue Bird, and that big three of Sue Bird, Jewell Loyd, and Brianna Stewart. That offseason was really tough, with Sue retiring, with Stewie leaving for the Liberty, and kind of a different roster. You get that high pick of Jordan Horston, Sammy Whitcomb comes back, and it's somewhat of a younger group. They didn't do too well in the standings, but they fought just about every game last year, and it was largely fun to watch that team. It was hard to see the losses and hard to see some of the mistakes that were made and the teaching points, but still a lot of fun to watch Jordan Horston, Sammy Whitcomb, Jewell Loyd, obviously in her historic season. Jade Melbourne learning throughout the course of the year, Dulcie Fancom-Mengiadu as well. So fun to witness that team. But now, with this offseason, there was a ton of speculation of what the Storm were going to do. They had that 4th overall pick. It gets traded. Jewell Loyd, a day before the last game of the season, signing that 2-year extension, which was massive. Otherwise, that was all we were going to be able to talk about throughout the course of this offseason was, is Jewell going to sign here or where is she going to go? And surely throughout the WNBA, that would have been the talk of the town anyway as well. But thankfully, whether it's General Manager Talisa Ray, Head Coach Noelle Quinn, this front office and ownership bringing in Skylar Diggins-Smith, that wasn't one that I necessarily expected. I thought maybe we'd go after NECA, but you go after that, you get the point guard that you talked about, and you added next to Jewell Loyd. You more than did that. So there's still a few roster spots to fill out. I imagine, again, that Seattle will go with an 11-player roster like we talked about last week. But it's just crazy to think about. You go from a big 3 2 seasons ago, a tough year last year, and now you've got a core 4. So you still have to play the games. You're obviously going to have to go through the Liberty, through the Las Vegas Aces, who just won the championship. But it's a lot fun to think about, having NECA here, having Skylar here, 2 more years at minimum of Jewell Loyd. So, and how about a hat tip for Jewell Loyd, obviously, for staying. She could have gone anywhere else. I don't think a lot of us would have called her a traitor for that sort of thing. And instead, she stays here, and she's, part of now this core 4. So some more news. I mean, this one's kind of minor because it isn't necessarily game-breaking, but on the 7th, it was announced that Jewell Loyd will take part in the Ruffles All-Star Celebrity Game for Team Shannon Sharp and the NBA All-Star Weekend. So there's that. So Jewell will continue to stay busy this offseason. Also, though, on the 7th, it was announced that 6 members of the Storm organization were headed to the Olympic qualifying tournaments in 2024. For the USA, Jewell Loyd, again, saying her name. Australia has 4 members of the Storm organization with Ezi Magbagor, Jade Melbourne, Sammy Whitcomb, and Storm legend Lauren Jackson. And then for Team Canada, head coach Noelle Quinn. Since then, all 6 of those players, folks, obviously, have advanced and have booked their spot to the Paris Olympics. So that was really cool to see. In addition to that, not just booking her place on the 11th of the month, it was announced that Ezi Magbagor was named as FIBA's Olympic qualifying tournament Brazil MVP. Say that 3 times fast. So Ezi had been playing really well overseas already, ahead of joining Team Australia for this tournament, doing really well in the league that she was already in, which was pretty fantastic to see. But she was named as the MVP of the tournament, as Australia finished with a 3-0 record. Ezi finished the tournament with averages of 12.7 points, 4.3 rebounds, and 3.0 blocks per game. across those 3 games. She had one of her best games for Australia in the opener on last Thursday, finishing with 18 points on 7 of 9 shooting, adding 7 rebounds and 4 blocks as the Opals held on to beat host country Brazil by a score of 85-80. She closed out the tournament with an 11-point, 4-block night and a narrow 2-point, 75-73 win over Serbia. So also, we'll talk about some of her other teammates. Jade Melbourne and Sammy Whitcomb had solid tournaments. Melbourne, playing in her tournament as a member of the senior national team, had 10 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, 1 steal, and 1 block in the Opals finale versus Serbia. She finished the tournament with 5.3 points, rebounds, 2.0 assists, and 0.7 steals in 3 games. Whitcomb contributed 4.7 points, 2.3 rebounds, 2.0 assists, 2 steals, and 1 block across 3 games. In terms of the other qualifying tournaments, the U.S., which had already clinched their berth into the Olympics, cruised to a 3-0 record in Belgium, with Jewel Lloyd averaging 10.3 points per game while shooting 57.9, including 55.6 from 3. She led the U.S. in scoring in their win over Nigeria, scoring 18 points in just 17 minutes while connecting on 7 of 11 attempts from the field and adding 3 three-pointers. And then head coach Noel Quinn with Canada helped guide them to an Olympic berth with the senior national team, earning their 3rd berth from the tournament in Hungary, widely considered to be the group of death, with 3 teams ranked in the FIBA top 10, in addition to the 19th ranked and host Hungary. So there's your little wrap-up from the qualifying tournaments for Paris Olympics. Nice to see all 6 members of the organization all qualify and punch their ticket as well. So that'll be a lot of fun. Obviously representing your country in these different sports is a whole different animal. So exciting to see that, and obviously exciting to be able to talk about this team adding NECA. There was a fun selfie, I'm sure I'll put it on the screen here, of Whitcomb, Magbagor, and Melbourne all reacting to the news of NECA signing here. So a lot of excitement. There's still some young aspects of this Storm team, with some of those players that I mentioned. Melbourne, Ezzy Magbagor is still incredibly young. So you've got the veteran leadership and the proven commodity of NECA, Skylar Diggins-Smith, and Jewel Lloyd, Sammy Whitcomb, and then you've got some of that younger aspect as well. So it'll be a lot of fun. Storm basketball will be a lot of fun this year. Hope to see you out there. We move over here to our Sounders, who, as I mentioned, coming back from Marbella, Spain, not necessarily I guess if you're looking at just results, the best way to end it, as we move over here to some game recaps, the Sounders, tried to jump ahead of things. The Sounders played 2 matches against Odense BK to finish out their trip to Spain, both of these friendlies, of course, losing both of them. As you can see, we'll show the first one, a score of 3-0. The first goal coming off of a first half penalty and then adding 2 more goals in the second half. A lot of first-team options here: Stephen Fry, Jonathan Bell, Arriaga, Nathan, Cody Baker, Josh Atencio, João Paulo, Leo Chu, Albert Rusnak, Christian Roldan, and Jordan Morris. And we get to some injury updates as well, because I'll say, hey, that's pretty starting 11. You'll say there's a few names missing. Yes, we'll go over that in a second. So they lose that one 3-0, kind of unfortunate. The second game was a 2-1 loss, so at least the Sounders get on the board. Played much differently. Did I say that name wrong? No, Odense BK. No, I said it right. So the club from Denmark, they scored twice in the first 12 minutes of the game, but it was somewhat even throughout the course of the match. Raul Ruiz scored for the Sounders in the 85th minute, a nice goal there. This game was much more of a second-choice lineup with Jacob Castro in goal, Paul Rothrock, Stuart Hawkins, Antino Lopez, Kosa Rienzi, Danny Leyva, Obed Vargas, Georgi Minanogu, Dylan Tevis, and then obviously Rui Diaz scoring as well. So not a lot to take much into these games, especially with these being friendlies. It's somewhat deceiving. They're pretty even in terms of the quality of the chances that they got. And again, I'm not going to take a lot into account with these friendlies. Rui Diaz, again, looking nice, active, looking for chances to score throughout the game is what you'd like to see, and that's mostly what I'll take from these games. Moving over here, as I mentioned, to those injury updates on the 8th, media heard from head coach Brian Schmetzer as the club kind of wrapped up their preseason in Spain. And just a few different notes with players and injury updates here. Not a ton that should hold folks out for perhaps an extended period of time outside of maybe Reed Baker Whiting, and we'll get to him here. Newly signed forward Denny Musovski picked up a small knock. Pedro de la Vega was being worked on, and he continues to work back from a hamstring issue, but his workload continues to steadily increase. João Paulo had hip discomfort, but it was deemed precautionary to keep him out. Josh Atencio had a tight hamstring and pulled himself out as a precaution. Alex Roldan had a hamstring issue, but they're just being careful with that. Reed Baker Whiting had a small setback, and he might be a couple more weeks out, so there's the one thing to kind of look at there, which is unfortunate, as I really liked when Reed's been able to get on the field and impact the game. And Jackson Reagan resumed training, and he should be good to go when the team returns from Spain. You notice I didn't mention Yeimar there. Yeimar was working on his visa, and I believe he is back in Seattle. We should see the group tomorrow, actually. So that's mostly what we've got for the Sounders. As I've kind of mentioned, not a ton to pick up there. Nice for them to have that trip in Spain, the bonding, with some of the new guys like Musovski, with John Bell, Pedro de la Vega, obviously, and to look forward there, have a few matches, get some stuff tried out. And really kind of the Sounders group, it's not super different. I know some fans were upset at the end of the year not being able to go on a deep run. Nico Lodero's gone. But, you keep most of this group and you add some new life. Nathan, I'm kind of excited to see how it just plays out. I didn't really need a ton of different change, and I'm happy that the club didn't decide to go in that sort of direction. Pardon me. So they've got one more preseason matchup to look forward to, and it will be at their new facility at Longacres. So wanted to just say that you should be following us on all of our socials at Circling Seattle Sports, because tomorrow the club will officially be opening up Longacres, their new training facility down just shortly away from Starfire, where they've held a lot of their training. We'll be able to see training there. We'll probably get some injury updates as well. So we'll, again, social media at Circling Seattle Sports to get to that. On the 17th, though, is their last preseason friendly. That is against Sacramento Republic. It will be at Longacres. They haven't announced if there will be any sort of streaming option for that, but that will be on February 17th with an 11 p.m. Kickoff time originally listed. So we move over here from our Sounders to our Kraken, and kind of similar to last week, we had all this positive news with our Seattle sports teams, and even mostly throughout the show already. I mean, the Seahawks adding to their coaching staff, the Mariners getting ready for spring training, the Storm adding NECA, and all of those players involved with their respective national teams, the Sounders coming back from Spain, looking ahead to what should be an exciting season, and then the Kraken, another week where it's just one loss that we have to look back to. So we'll go straight into that with the Kraken here. They returned from the NHL All-Star break. They had a few days of practice on the 8th and the 9th. Then on the 10th, they got back to work, kicking off a 4-game road trip straight out of the break, beginning in Philadelphia. The city of brotherly love was not too kind to the Kraken, as they would lose to the Flyers by a score of 2-3. Just a really frustrating game. That final score is a lot closer than really what the game felt like. Seattle loses this one 2-3. Tomas Tatar gets on the board in the second period. Jared McCann scores in the third period on the only shot that the Kraken registered in the third period. That's just take that one tidbit and kind of think about that as you're thinking about this game. If you haven't seen it, or even if you have seen it, and just think about the fact they only had one shot on goal in the final frame. Jared McCann scoring that last goal to put Seattle within one goal. He is our player of the game. 1 goal, 1 point, 3 shots, and 2 hits in this one. Just kind of tough. I mean, the Kraken gave up a shorthanded goal, which wasn't great. The Flyers actually do have a good amount of shorthanded goals and the second best PK in terms of percentage in the NHL. So tough to go up against that unit. Joey Decord kind of let up a somewhat soft goal in this one as well. So just kind of a tough one. Seattle unable to get the final push. They do bring on the sixth skater late. It doesn't mean anything. They're really, again, just the lack of shots on goal, the lack of really challenging Cal Peterson in net. This wasn't the sort of game where it's like they were generating good chances and it wasn't going, like that loss to the Sharks before the break. This one was just kind of disappointing. It didn't seem like they were fully cohesive with the puck. The lines didn't look like they were clicking. Just frustrating to look at with the Kraken here. Justin Schultz was out of this game due to personal reasons, according to head coach Dave Haxtell. Luckily, Riker Evans, who had been called up on February 7th back from the AHL affiliate Coachella Valley Firebirds, was able to step in there, played on the pairing with Brian Dumoulin. So kind of perfectly how that had worked out when Evans has been up anyway. Nice to see that there. But just frustrating to see the lack of cohesion with the forward lines, lack of the shots in the third period, and kind of as a whole, even ahead of the third period where they just got the one shot on goal that ended up being McCann's goal that even was a shot that was tipped from a Flyers defenseman's stick, pardon me. Just frustrating to see this kind of loss. Philadelphia is not a bad team under John Tortorella. They've improved throughout the course of the season. They're not a bad team, again. But just frustrating to see the lack of offensive quality, the lack of execution offensively in these past two games, whether it's this game against the Flyers or the game ahead of the break with the San Jose Sharks. These are points that you need. After tonight's game against the Devils, you've got 30 games left, and you've still got ground to make up, whether it's in the wild card race. And as a whole, I don't think you're going to be able to get a division spot in the playoffs just because of how well the Golden Knights, the Canucks, and the Oilers have played. I think that's kind of out of the picture. It's now down to a wild card spot in the Western Conference, and you're not doing yourself any favors with that because of the lack of points that you've been racking up, the losing streaks that you've been on throughout the course of the year, and the fact that the other teams in the playoff chase for the wild card are winning as well. So you're really losing out right now. You need to be able to turn things around. I kind of doubt there's any moves made at the deadline. I imagine this team stays pat, which is fine. I think that this team has the pieces to be able to get it together. It's just frustrating to see, the lack of execution when the potential is there. So that's kind of how I feel with this Kraken team. I mean, there's not a lot to digest with just the one game taking place, but there are some important matchups to look forward to over the course of this upcoming week. So by the time you're seeing this, the Kraken will have started their game against the New Jersey Devils. It is the first game of a back-to-back in the New Jersey-New York area. 4 p.m. Pacific time. The team is back on Root Sports after being on ESPN Plus/Hulu last game, against the Flyers. Then tomorrow, February 13th, at the New York Islanders is a 4:30 p.m. start, the second game of a back-to-back. We will likely at least see Philip Grubauer in tonight or tomorrow. We haven't gotten any confirmation on either of these games with him starting yet. We don't have a starting goalie because head coach Dave Haxtell doesn't do that. But we'll see him at least in one of these games. And then a few days later, to end that road trip, the team will head up to Boston. They'll ship up to Boston on February 15th for a game against the Bruins at 4 o'clock. So something to look forward to there. Just frustrating to see the losses the last two games, as well as the disappointing efforts in terms of stacking points ahead not even ahead of this current playoff push. So that wraps up what we've got for the Kraken currently. We head over to our last segment of the show with the Seattle Reign FC. As I mentioned at the height of things, they finished up their preseason trip as they were down in Costa Rica. They did have two friendlies set up for this, one with the club that was hosting them down in Costa Rica. That unfortunately did not happen Liga Deportiva Alajuelense was scheduled, but the country had a moratorium on gatherings ahead of municipal elections. So the friendly was supposed to be played behind closed doors. The clubs were unable to get official approval to hold that game. So that didn't happen. So the only match of the two that the Reign were able to get going was this one that we'll put up on your screen here, this friendly against the Costa Rica national team, FCRF. It was a 4-0 win. Four goals here, four different goal scorers. Bethany Balser scored in the 3rd minute to kick things off. 10 minutes later in the 13th, Ziara King scored. Shortly after halftime, with a bunch of substitutions made, Ryan Brown scored in the 48th minute. And then Jordan Heidema put the finishing touches on things, the exclamation point, with a 55th minute goal, which came off of a penalty. So somewhat resounding there. Nice to kind of see three of those main faces that I'd imagined to score do so with Balser, King, and Heidema. Nice to see Ryan Brown scoring as well. She was someone that, with her speed on the wing defensively, can create some havoc and some damage, and nice to see her get on the board as well, even if it's just a friendly. So also unfortunate to not be able to see that other friendly against their host club take place because of the different outlying circumstances. So again, kind of similar to the situation with the Sounders there with their friendly. Not a lot you can take from these per se, outside of getting the depth in. Sam Meza, the draft pick from this past draft out of North Carolina. I apologize, wrong Carolina. Lot of speed there. Kind of a pesky player on the ball, kind of hounding the opposition. So that was fun to see and see her fill that kind of role, obviously with the limited roster spots, and a lot of proven players already for the Reign. These draft picks and these non-roster invitations are going to have to do a lot to be able to get attention from the coaching staff and from other players. So you kind of got to do what you can to be able to get noticed and even potentially hang around, sign a contract, or be at the ready for when the Reign are going to have to fill these spots, or if they need to fill so due to some unseen circumstance. So move over to some team-related news here. On the 7th, we had 3 Reign players called into national team duty for the inaugural CONCACAF W Gold Cup. One from the U.S. Women's National Team, defender Alana Cook called in, so nice to see Alana there. Kind of surprised to not see Sophia Huerta called in. And then 2 for Team Canada, midfielder Quinn, and for Jordan Heidema. So Heidema, Cook, and Quinn all taking part in the inaugural CONCACAF W Gold Cup. The Gold Cup has taken place on the men's side of things, so nice to see it active with the women's national teams as well. The same day, it was announced that forward Veronica Latsko had been extended through the 2025 season. Entering her 3rd year now with the Reign, the veteran attacker is tied for the 3rd most regular season appearances on the team, with 38 since 2022. She's coming off of a year where she recorded single-season highs in goals and assists, both tied for 2nd on the team respectively at 4 and 2. The 28-year-old also scored back-to-back game-winning goals in the quarter and semifinal matches of these last playoffs to help the club reach its 3rd NWSL championship. Obviously, with Latsko, those 2 games that we looked at and that you just talked about, very big, and that we, just talking about the grinder that she is, earning the sort of recognition that she got with those winners there. Prior to joining the Reign, Latsko spent 4 years with the Houston Dash, totaling 7 goals and 4 assists. She's a Pennsylvania native. She was with Houston when the club won the first ever Challenge Cup back in 2020. And we've talked about the Challenge Cup, now it being just a match played with the Shield winner of the last year and the championship winner of the last year. So kind of unfortunate that the Challenge Cup has gone to that. She is also tied for the most Challenge Cup games played all time in league history, registering 25 appearances, 1 goal, and 2 assists through that tournament. So, unfortunately, don't think that those numbers necessarily will increase over time unless the Reign win more shields or win a championship, which they haven't done yet, unfortunately. But nice to see Latsko extended. Again, her ability to play all over the field, play all different sorts of roles, whether it's as a starter, off the bench, in short minutes, even playing some outside back with the World Cup happening this past year. Just the definition, as I've said throughout our Reign segments the last few months, the last few years even, such a grinder and the ultimate teammate, that we've been able to see, at least. The next day, some more fan-oriented per se, the club announced its theme matches for the upcoming season, so we'll look at that here. Always fun each year when theme matches are announced. Obviously wanting to make folks from different communities feel included. So we've got our theme matches. There's home opener, which I don't know how much of a theme that is. That's March 17th versus the Washington Spirit. Earth Day, April 21st versus Chicago. AANHPI, May 19th versus Orlando, which is nice to see. Juneteenth, June 16th versus Portland. The Pride match, June 23rd versus Racing Louisville. Kids Day, July 7th versus Utah. Hispanic Heritage, September 29th versus Bay FC. Kick Breast Cancer on October 4th. And then obviously wrapping things up at the end of the year with Fan Appreciation, October 18th versus Houston. So again, theme matches, nice to see that sort of thing integrated there, and to kind of tap into the different communities that obviously support the team, that are part of the team throughout the organization. Obviously fun to see that. So that's what we've got for the Rain and for the show. As I mentioned, with the Sounders and the Rain returning from their respective preseason camps in Spain and in Costa Rica, the Seahawks continued to add to their coaching staff. The Mariners quickly approached spring training. The Storm have created a core four ahead of the upcoming season and look to be a contender in the WNBA. The Kraken got to get back to things, falling to the Flyers this past week, and then, technically on a 2-game losing streak after dropping to the Sharks before the All-Star break, and then the Rain as well, returning from their preseason camp. So until we see you next week on the 19th of February, which will be the same day as the Kraken taking on the Red Wings, take care of yourselves, be well, and do whatever you can to make today a great day. And stay dry out there.